Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to another edition of Natural Niche and the Alternative Guy. Uh, my name is Hashem. Today we have a special guest. We've had him a couple of times before, and he's a very serious, powerful historian, and he's a homegrown historian. Uh, I just want him to introduce himself again for those that haven't heard of him. So, Brother Muhammad, tell us a little
Oh,
bit
my
about
name is
yourself.
Muhammad Ali Salam. Uh, I, I'm a native of Snow Hill Institute, Alabama, school founded by one of the first graduates of Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee Institute, who carried on the Booker T. Washington program. From there, my education included a degree in history from Lincoln University, while I studied under Dr. Lorenzo Green, protege of Carter G. Woodson, who assisted him in establishing, in fact, the Negro History Week, which became the month. And from there, I studied what was called Third World History at the University of Missouri, and Spanish and Arabic at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And I'm the author of the book, A Black Man's Journey in America. So I am pleased to be here today with my good friend Hashem.
Okay, so today we got a real serious, very neglected topic that we want to cover today. And the topic is the study of Native Americans. We know that that's an extensive subject, so we're going to try to cover some of the bases today. But I also want to recognize two other people, and that's Dan Calloway and Chief Warhorse. She's a Indian chief down in Louisiana. So I want to acknowledge those two individuals and give kudos to them for their work. So today we're going to cover some of the same topics, probably from a slightly another perspective, and we're going to have some references that we'll cover too. So we'll have uh, pictures of different books where if you want to do some research on this topic, you can do so yourself. So we're going to start off with the question of the major tribes and their struggles against the white intrusions of this land.
Again, as I expressed to Hashem, and as he just reiterated, the history of the Native America is too general for such a short presentation, so we were going to try to narrow it down to the Native American in the Southeast. And those major tribes in the Southeast, as we know, was what the white man Hawkins later termed as the 5 civilized tribes, as he were trying to civilize them into the ways of the white man. In short, to get them from continuing their struggle against him. And that was the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Cherokee, and the Seminole. Now, most of these names that we know regarding the identity of those Indians were names that were given to them by the white man. Those general tribes belonged to basically the tribe of the Muskogees is basically who they were. Perhaps the Cherokee might be original, because we know that word. Uh, uh, Perhaps not, but I was thinking in terms of many of them was located in northern Alabama and where it borders Tennessee, and on that Tennessee River, because that word Tennessee, was a Cherokee word. But I think it's important to first understand that you really cannot discuss the history of the Native American without discussing the history of Black America. Their relationship was so entwined in the shaping of those two cultures and in the undermining of those two cultures here in the United States of America. And as we know, the Indian don't resent that word Indian. Many of them resent the word Native American. They don't even want the word America attached to them, because they were nations, and a lot of them prefer the term indigenous. So, in prefacing this, before we get into the Native America or the indigenous people in the Americas, is what we have to first define. And this might seem inconsequential to our subject, Hashem, but the indigenous people to America, according to the scholars of Americas in the antiquity, Leo Weiner and Barry Fell and Sertima, more recent, was the black people themselves. So when we think of the Native American we see today, and many of them we see, and we'll get to that $5 Indian that you like so much, but even the Native American that we think look like the Native American, the original Native American didn't even look like them. The original Native American were black people. And these scholars prove that as early as 700 BC, we're talking about 700 years before Christ, that the Kushite dynasty that ruled Egypt, the 25th dynasty under Tirahaca and Pianke, they found coins and artifacts in the Americas that prove that these people had been to the Americas.
Oh.
And so the Native Americans we think of today, we think of them as dating back maybe as late as 13,000 years ago. But when you're talking about the origin of the Americas, you're talking about black people haven't been over here some hundred thousands of years. So I hope I didn't go off.
No. We needed to bring that out because that's the missing. We got to connect the dots.
Right.
And that's what's information like this has been missing out of the whole puzzle.
Exactly.
And so that's what we're here for. Okay, so I appreciate that. So now let's get into so why was Florida so important in the struggle?
Well, during the British colonial period in the Americas, with the 13 colonies, the slaves in South Carolina, as we know, Florida was one of the competing European countries for dominance in the Americas. It was basically France, Spain, Britain were the leading competitors. Well, Spain, as a strategy against the British, made a treaty with the black slaves in the Carolinas, saying that if you would escape from the Carolinas into Florida, we will give you sanctuary and we will give you liberty on the condition that you convert to Catholicism.
Okay, so this was
during the colonial period.
Yeah, so this was after. So the Native Americans were already here, and they were established as nations.
Yes.
until who was the first one to come? The Spanish?
The Spanish was the first
Spanish
one.
was the first
The
one.
first, yes.
Okay.
And so this is why the colony of Georgia, which is the 13th and last of the colony,
Okay.
was actually formed. Because Oglethorpe went to King George, from which Georgia is named after, and told him, let me create a buffer colony between South Carolina and Florida, because we are losing many slaves from the Carolinas. And in fact, Oglethorpe lost his life in Florida fighting against those. So those slaves in the Carolinas escaped into Florida. In fact, the first autonomous town in America, black autonomous town in America, was what was called Fort Mose. They named it Fort Mose. And they named it that word in honor of Moses, because Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt, out of bondage into freedom. So they named it Fort Moses. You can go there now and visit it. It's right outside St. Petersburg.
Okay.
And so when they got to Florida, in Florida was basically the Indians were already there. And also those white people later on during the American Revolution, the Tories who supported the British, escaped to Florida. Florida was a rebellious colony, that's what it was. But Florida was led by blacks. Because Florida has a topography similar to Africa, the agriculture there was dominant by the Africans. So the Africans played a dominant role. Without the Africans, Florida could not have existed. It was the Africans who fed the people. It was the African slaves who were your greatest military leaders and soldiers who fought against the British, who came and tried to take Florida back. And so when the United States is formed now with the American Revolution, and we'll get to that later, but we have to look at this war, the 7-Year War in Europe, which was called the French Indian Wars over here.
Right.
As a result of that war, England took Florida from the Spaniards. Now, after the American Revolution, Britain gave Florida back to Spain. And now the United States, these 13 colonies now are a nation. And they have inherited the same problem that colonial England had with these runaway slaves in Florida. Now, those are mostly Seminole Indians. Now, they give the impression, they said, of all of those 5 civilized nations, the nation that was most amiable with blacks were the Seminoles. Well, Dr. Samaria Rashid of Indiana State University have gone and questioned that and said that the Seminoles themselves were black. What do you mean?
Right.
Because when the Spanish first colonized over here and they brought the slaves with them, there was this group of slaves that they couldn't tame. They couldn't control them. So they gave them the name Cimarron. In Spanish, the word Cimarron refers to a wild horse. A wild horse that you can't tame, you can't control them. And so when the French came in contact with them, they called them the Maroons. When the British came in contact with them, they called them the Seminoles. So really the Seminole is just a misnomer of the Cimarron. I'll stop here because I know you have some questions that I might be...
No. All right, now, can you briefly describe the Fort, was it Mims massacre?
Fort Mims massacre is very important.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about the Fort Mims massacre, now we are out of colonial period, we are into the United States.
Okay.
And now this also relates to Florida, because when the British took control of Florida, to govern it, they divided it in, or separated it into East Florida, with its capital at St. Augustine, and West Florida, with its capital at Pensacola.
Okay.
And people say that St. Augustine is the oldest city in the United States, but it wasn't. It was Pensacola. Pensacola is the oldest, but that town didn't last. They eventually abandoned it. So, at the Battle of Burnt Corn in Escambia County, Alabama, the Creek were en route to Pensacola to get arms from the Spaniards to come back and fight the Americans. The Americans became aware of it, and so they massacred those Indians at the Battle of Burnt Corn, and that occurred around 1811. Now these things are actually leading up to the Battle of
Horseshoe Bend?
no,
Oh, okay.
yeah, Horseshoe Bend, of course,
Okay, all right.
1812, the
Okay.
Battle of 1812. Also, now to take vengeance at the Battle of Fort Sim, it's the same year, 1811. The Indian attacked Fort Sim and massacred these Americans. Now, to take vengeance against the Indian, these Creeks down, which are called the Red Sticks. There was two of these Creek groups. The Red Sticks are those who hated the white man, and the other ones, Creeks, were allied with the white man. So many of those who were allied with the white man were killed there too with the white man at the Fort Mims massacre.
Okay.
Now the United States is going to take revenge against the Fort Mims massacre. Andrew Jackson is in Tennessee,
Okay.
and he becomes enraged over that. He's a military man, so he leads a battalion into what was called Horseshoe Bend.
Okay.
This is occurring in Alabama, South Alabama, all three of these wars, where Alabama almost is in the proximity of meeting Pensacola. And so at that battle, Andrew Jackson defeats the Creeks, and he forces them into a treaty. He even names that Fort Jackson. And in the Treaty of Fort Jackson, he forces them to cede 23 million acres of land, which became almost a third of the state of present-day Alabama, and close to that much of present-day Georgia, from these Creeks. That ended the Creeks in Alabama. The ones that survived, they went into Pensacola. And in Pensacola, they joined on to the Seminoles under the leadership of the black man, Billy Bowleg. He was a black man, the leader
Yeah.
of the Seminoles in West Florida. And they lead the insurgency against the Americans there until finally Andrew Jackson defeat the Seminoles in West Florida. So the longest wars that the Americans fought against any Indians anywhere was the wars with the Seminoles. And these are basically black people. They would not submit to white rule. This is very important for us to realize, is that the idea that we somehow submitted to oppression. Even today, in terms of GDP, there's no war America expedited as much funds to defeat as those Seminoles in Florida. Not only that, there were 3 wars. When they thought they had beat them at one level, they retreated and they lived to fight again. And so this is what propelled Andrew Jackson into the presidency of the United States at the election of 1828.
So he was a military man, then he became a political man.
That's what made you a political man.
Right.
Well, you a killer and a murderer of Indians.
Wow.
Also all the way up to Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
Although Lincoln claimed he didn't kill no England, but all of them, Zachary Taylor, William Harrison of the Indiana Territory, who became the first governor of he fought against Tecumseh.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Now, Tecumseh is very interesting because as the Native Americans,
So Tecumseh was Native American?
he's a Native American,
Okay.
but he was in the
yes.
Indiana Territory. I think the Indiana Territory might include modern day states of perhaps Illinois, and as we know, Indiana. Indiana is named after the Indians because of all those battles, because at the Battle of Tippecanoe. But Tecumseh and his brother, who was known as the Prophet, and Tecumseh had the philosophy that we are losing ground everywhere. The only solution for us is that we must make a national coalition and come at the white man in a united form. So he leaves the Indiana Territory and he goes into the southeast, Tecumseh. And Tecumseh speak and teach to the Native Americans in the southeast about the unity of all the tribes to fight. When he leaves Indiana, he tells his brother, make sure not to attack garrison forces. Wait till I return. Some say that the prophet disobeyed him. But anyhow, Garrison, recognizing Tecumseh was gone, and Tecumseh was a brilliant military tactician, he attacked and destroyed their villages, their crops, and murdered the people. And so that was basically the end of Tecumseh. Now Tecumseh goes on and fight for the British in the War of 1812. But now the battle is in the southeast of those battles we just got through talking about. These men in the southeast, they were greatly influenced by that visit of Tecumseh coming to the southeast. And go ahead, brother.
So, can you expound on the rumor that many Native Americans, I know you kind of covered this, but can you expound a little bit more on the rumor that many Native Americans were black? Because when we talk to most so-called African Americans, most of them will say, oh, well, I got Indian in my family, you always hear that. I got Indian. My grandmother was Indian, or my great-grandmother, or something like that. So is that a rumor, or is that
No,
much factual?
I think we have to understand, one, in answering that question, I'll preface it this way by saying, many of us think that the white man took this country because of his military prowess. The major reason that contributed to his defeat of the Native American and his conquest of the world as he came out of the cold weather is that the people didn't have an immunity against his diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So more Native Americans died as a result of coming in contact with him. And so the Native American, from a survival perspective, understood that if they were going to survive, because the blacks, one of the reasons they were chosen for slavery, they tried the Indians first, is because the blacks had an immunity against the white man's diseases. So the Native American came to understand that if they were going to have a future, their future was going to be in the blood of the black man. So it wasn't necessarily a military and political alliance. It was also a biological, an attempt to preserve himself genetically as a people. And this is why the author of one of the books I was reading would say that if you look in the southeast, the average African American you see, and you know Andrew Jackson with the Trail of Tears when he moved them up into Oklahoma to get them out of the southeast,
Right.
he didn't get them out because they were in the blacks. That's how they survived. So if you looking in the southeast for the Native American, you have to look at Black America. That's who they are. Mm-hmm. And so when they say that, yes, they'll know what they're talking about. Now, I'm 70 years old, and I know as a child, I knew relatives in my family who were Indian, pure-blooded Indian. Mm-hmm. I knew of pure-blooded Indians sitting on the porch talking with my father. And that's true in most Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, where you're from, mm-hmm. throughout the Southeast. If you are my age, you knew full-blooded Native Americans. So, no, that's not a fallacy.
So that term, African American, it's a fairly new term that was brought about.
We're not African, nor are we American. We are the original people of the earth. We are the indigenous people of the earth. We are far older than the word Africa. As the Native American don't want to use the word, we are far older than that word. And that's what he does. Wherever he goes, he names things. He names you. Mm-hmm. He gives you a name. Mm-hmm. And when we look into, not getting off the subject, into Scripture, that's what Adam was doing, right? Mm-hmm. Adam was naming things, right?
Right.
So that's what he does. He names it, then he controls it. So all of the continent, perhaps only original name of any continent might be Asia.
Okay, ahead, so was Spain considered a friend of the blacks then? I mean, you know.
No, these people were vying for dominance in the New World, and they were using people as a political strategy. Okay. Just as could we say was Abraham Lincoln a friend of the blacks when he freed the blacks of the Emancipation Proclamation. Right. That was a political and a military strategy. Right. And so the same thing the blacks were doing. Blacks were using them because at the Battle of the War of 1812, the British said to the blacks, if you fight for us, we will free you. And that's how blacks got to Nova Scotia, and by way of that, to Sierra Leone. And at that treaty, at the end of the American Revolution, same thing. At the treaty at the end of that war, that's one of the things the United States demanded that the British do, is send us back those slaves.
So we want to make it clear then that all Black Americans didn't come through the transatlantic slave trade.
No. As you read in the writings of De Soto, the Spanish explorer, mm-hmm. when he got here, he said, where did these black people come from? Mm-hmm. And you read a biography, Columbus' son said the same thing. Mm-hmm. They met blacks when they came here. Mm-hmm. I mean, to even not realize that, we say these things today and say, take an attitude like, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, I can't believe that. Right. We were all over the world. Mm-hmm. Everywhere in the world. We were all over the world. Mm-hmm. That's why we are such friends of the sun. Right. And that's why a lot of people can't take the sun. Right. We are that which came for the sun to accommodate.
Yep. Okay, that was serious there. So what areas did the Creeks, the Cherokees, and the Seminoles mostly dominate?
Well, the Creeks mostly was in Alabama. And again, that word Creek is a word the white man gave them. Because in Alabama, that part of Alabama, there were so many creeks there. So he just named them creeks.
Oh, okay. So the creek, he was talking about running water. So
water. So he called them the creeks.
Okay.
But that's not their name.
Right. I
guess. Yeah.
Okay.
And the Cherokees were mostly in, we'll say, Georgia and Tennessee. We have to remember that the Cherokees sided mostly with the white man. The Cherokees tried to emulate the white man. Right. They had schools and accepted his education. And they helped them defeat the Creeks, the Cherokees. And the Cherokees was the last to get sent up the river, but they got sent up the river.
Still
They
there.
thought they wasn't going on the Trail of Tears up there to Oklahoma.
Right.
And they took their land and they sent them up the road too.
So that was a part of the Indian Removal Act.
The Indian Removal Act, yes.
And who instrumented that?
That was under the administration of Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, who the Creeks called the devil.
I wonder
Even
why.
today, there's no two things that the Indians hate more than the word Andrew Jackson and the Dawes Act.
Right.
Yes.
We haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay.
We're gonna get to
Okay.
we're pretty close to it. Let's get on. Okay, so the British acquired Florida. So what role did the blacks play in that arrangement? So we pretty much uncovered it, but what role did they? I mean, because they.
Well, you got to get Florida, and there's a relationship between Florida and Alabama. And you notice that Alabama becomes a state the same year of the Adams-Onis Treaty, which makes Florida a territory. Now, Florida, they went back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Florida didn't become a state, I think, maybe till 45 or something. And then you have to look at the fact that Eli Whitney had invented that cotton gin in 1790, as 1800s approaching.
Right.
And that land in Alabama is the most suitable land for cotton production. So cotton is coming now, on its way to remove tobacco. It's time to move out of the seaboard states of your state, Virginia, the tobacco states, and Maryland.
North Carolina.
Yes, we're moving now toward Cotton Kingdom, and we know that from history that state was Alabama, and you could not get Alabama unless you get Florida. So they were going back and forth, Florida and Alabama, and so.
So Louisiana was a part of Florida. I mean, Louisiana was Florida at one time, right?
Part of it, yes. Yes, and Alabama was part of the Mississippi Territory at one time.
Right.
And the French had Louisiana. And that was a part of that treaty that ended that French-Indian War, is that Florida went to England and Louisiana went to England. And also Canada, in fact, went to England. Because you got to remember that war was about up there in the Ohio Valley, but its implications was also down here in the southeast. But all of this is in the realm of the War of 1812.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we didn't have this question. We hadn't talked about this question, but if you could briefly talk about the Trail of Tears a little bit. I know that's a subject by itself, because that was a treacherous move that took place, the Trail of Tears. So can you?
Yes, and again, the Trail of Tears is also related to cotton too, because to go into this cotton production, you got to get these Native Americans off their land, and these states that they took them off and sent them up there to the Oklahoma Territory became your major cotton producing states, if you look at it. And and that's what it was all about. It was about land theft. You stole the land. Now let's get them off it, so we can go into cotton. And cotton is really what made America the power in the world. An economic power was cotton.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's wrap it up with this last question here, and that's the Dawes Act and the concept known as the $5 Indian.
Well, now that you got them up in Oklahoma, you're supposed to sell them up there and give them that territory. And now you're going back and going to take that territory from them too. You have that territory. You're taking them from down here and giving them that territory. So you going up there and you're going to take that territory too. So, Oklahoma became a state in 1908. All of this, the Dawes Treaty and the Curtis Treaty, what it's leading to is that we want to bring Oklahoma into the Union as a state. It became a state in 1908. And that Dawes Treaty was 1887, I believe. And that Dawes Treaty was about ending private, not ending private property, but ending collective ownership of land, which is what the Indians believed in. They said, you cannot sell land. You can only sell that which you can carry away. I can sell this book because I can walk away with it. I can't sell no land because I can't pick it up and walk away with it. The land belongs to everybody. And so the Indian had, and in fact, the white man is the father of the concept of private enterprise. Before him, people had a concept of collectivism, of communalism. But he come, this is mine. This is mine too. And so he is again moving toward statehood for Oklahoma. And he cannot bring Oklahoma into the Union with the Indians talking about they have separate nations of their own, separate cultures of their own. And so they, and you know the Dawes Act perhaps better than I do. They take this land from them and portion it off to them as plots, as private property. So there's a rush from white people. You know, actually, many of these white people are these white people who had landed on Ellis Island, in New York, Ellis Island.
Yeah.
This European that Martin Luther King talks about. But you know, in that last speech, some of the last speeches, he talking to and running out there to take the Native Americans' land. And so they're going to get, I got to get some of this. Private, you couldn't do it unless you start privatizing that property. And so here we have white people, which is called the $5 Indian. The $5 Indian is white people paying off those white agents to declare them as Indians so they could get some of that land. So they took the title, the $5 Indian, and swindled them out of their land. And
So a lot of them are some of the same people that that have these casinos and all this kind of
exactly.
stuff. They're not even the original.
They're white people.
Right.
They're white people. That's who they are.
Right.
They just stole the Native Americans' land. And now, what Donald Trump said it once himself when he referred to it. He said, those not Indians, those white people.
Right.
You know, Donald Trump, he'll open his mouth and say anything. If somebody put some truth in him,
Right.
he might be a good guy.
Right.
If you put some truth in him,
Yeah.
because he gonna just say it.
Right.
But in that case, he was right.
Right.
And you go down to Atmore, Alabama. Atmore, Alabama is in Escambia County, Alabama. Pensacola is in Escambia County, Florida. So at one time, that was part of Florida. And that's why they still have the same county name. Now, the Poach Indian tribe, they have those casinos down there. You go down there, you can see those casinos. And that's who they are. And you know, I was down there and a guy introduced me to a guy. And he told me, he said, the black guy told me, he said, this is an Indian, after the guy had left. I said, man, I told the black guy is very dark. I said, man, you more Indian than he is. That ain't no Indian. But this is what they've done.
Right.
Yes.
Taking everything.
Taking everything.
Okay, Brother Muhammad, you said you wanted to make a comment about a young lady, young
Yes.
Native American or Indigenous American. We're gonna close with this
Okay.
this comment here.
And hopefully you can add her picture. She's a very beautiful young lady. Her name was Manya Lewis. And her Native American name was Wildfire.
Wildfire.
Wildfire, yes.
Okay.
And she was a member of the Chippewa Indians. And she was actually one of the greatest artists in America, in my opinion. She attended Oberlin College. At that college, Oberlin College, has a history of being very liberal. That's the first white school that accepted black people, liberal arts school. And she distinguished herself as a great artist. And she loved to draw pictures of the black abolitionists. And she was great. Her work was all in London and all throughout Europe. So this white lady, Lydia Maria Childs, interviewed her and asked her about her identity. And she asked her, did she have any white blood in her? And this is her reply. This is Edmonia's reply. No, I have not a single drop of what is called white blood in my veins. My father was a full-blooded Negro, and my mother was a full-blooded Chippewa. And have you lived with the Chippewas? She asked. Yes. My mother was dying. She wanted me to promise that I would live 3 years with her people, and I did. You know, while she was at Oberlin College, she was a very revolutionary person too. She was accused of murdering one of those white students there. And if you look, I said a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you look at her picture, you can get that feeling of that mystic feeling, of that deep spirituality, very pensive. It's like an inner vision, the knowledge, not the exterior knowledge exclusively, but the knowledge that radiates from the heart to the mind, the knowledge that really gives you understanding of things, not the head. Yes, the head, but if it's not begun in the heart, it's not the real knowledge. You can see that in her. A very beautiful young lady. And they talked about how she dressed like a mystic. So I thought I would just end it by mentioning her. And I hope that some of the people will begin to even study this lady. Look her up. Wildfire or Manya Lewis in Black history. I think we should include her more. And I think we should remember, you cannot talk about Black history and separate it from Native American history. You cannot talk about Native American history and separate it from Black history, because the Native Americans understood that their very survival was in Black people. They understood that. And here you have some of these Indian tribes today refusing to acknowledge blacks as part of their tribe. And that's why you're suffering. And it's also one of the reasons why blacks are suffering. The strength of blacks and Native America, in early America, it was from that coalition of Native American and black. So we need to not separate it. And even when you talk about the Latinos need to understand something. They are not Latinos. They are not Hispanics. Hispanic. I mean, you're saying you belong to Spain.
Right.
They are Native American.
Right.
That's who they are.
Yeah. Wow.
That American alliance of blacks and the regional people over here. They don't include white people. They are the oppressors. They are the historical oppressors. And we are to be victorious. We have to make that alliance. Not just here in the United States, but all in Central America, all in South America, all in the Caribbean. We have to make that alliance over here in the New World. if we are going to establish a power base. So when you say African Americans, that's what you should mean. African Americans should mean blacks and all Native Americans.
Well, Brother Muhammad, I really appreciate this.
We married among each other.
Yeah.
We should continue to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We should continue to integrate the families. That's how we are going to strengthen ourselves. And another reason the blacks were so useful with the Native Americans is they spoke Spanish, they spoke English, they spoke French, because they knew the white man. And the Native American knew that. And today even, nobody knows this white man like we do. Am I right or wrong?
Oh, you're right.
We know this white man.
Yeah.
That's why the Arabs, when they come in here, that's how they got in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They came here on their own. They didn't come to us and asked us. We know, we could have told you. And look at you now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
And the blacks spoke the Indian languages too.
Right. That is.
I'm going to do something that's very difficult for me. I'm going to be quiet.
Well, look, I appreciate it, and
Okay, brother.
we'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this serious topic, and we're gonna wrap it up with that. But we're gonna have many more interesting shows that we're gonna do on different histories, on history, because that's where most people are lacking.
Yes.
Understanding how all of
Yes.
this stuff came about.
Yes. And because of that.
And once you understand how this came about, the whole dynamics of how this country and all of these European countries were established, and you understand, we should need to understand the history of Africa, but we also need to understand the history of Native Americans
Yes.
also.
Yes.
So we're going to end with that. Peace. Thank you.